he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine."
When the glorified Jesus Christ broke the third seal, a rider with a pair of balances sitting on a black horse was mandated to make wheat and barley, the staple foods of the poor masses, more scarce and expensive, and not to hurt the oil and wine, the delicacies and the luxuries of the rich minority. The first 4 seals will reveal 4 different colors of horses: white, red, black, and pale, that is, green and brown colors. These 4 different colored horses are the counterfeit or imitation of God-Jehovah's 4 spirits of heaven, as in Zechariah chapter 6 verses 1 to 8, who supervise and control the affairs of the world. The 4 spirits of heaven are driven in chariots drawn by white, red, black, and pale-colored horses respectively. The spiritual personalities in the 4 seals of Revelation are the counterfeit spirits of heaven. These are the spiritual wicked spirits in high places, as in Ephesians chapter 6 verse 12, who are cohorts of Satan and who rule and influence dispensation and epochs on behalf of Satan, in opposition to God-Jehovah's 4 spirits of heaven. They are spiritual princes like the prince of Persia and the prince of Grecia, as in Daniel chapter 10 verses 13 to 21. But instead of these counterfeit spirits of heaven to control specific kingdoms or empires like their predecessors, they will be global patron spirits. In fact, these are the last day spirits of the Antichrist, who will be the forerunners of the long-awaited Antichrist, the false Messiah. The horse is associated with warfare and battles, as in Psalm 76 verse 6, Proverbs chapter 21 verse 31, Jeremiah chapter 8 verse 6, Ezra chapter 26 verse 10. The color of the horse in this 3rd seal, which is black, is the emblem of the aftermath of war and the dismal consequences of distress, desolations, and scarcity. The instrument this rider is carrying, which is a pair of balances, indicates a total different kind of warfare in this particular dispensation. The pair of balances represent 2 areas of human social engineering and interactions. Number 1, the pair of balances were used to measure the weights of foodstuffs, market produces, and money in the markets in the primitive era. And number 2, the pair of balances are also used as the emblem or logo of justice, equity, and the law. This rider is the patron spirit of the age on behalf of the god of this world, Satan. The seals will take place before the rapture of the saints, not after it. Since the rapture of the saints will take place in the 6th seal, it then means that the human historical events of the first 5 seals, including this 3rd seal, must take place before the rapture of the saints. Only the 7th seal will be broken after the rapture of the saints to heaven. So then, when the glorified Jesus Christ broke the 3rd seal, the rider with a pair of balances was mandated to make wheat and barley, the staple foods of the poor masses, more scarce and expensive by rationing. And he was mandated also not to hurt or tamper with the oil and wine, which are the delicacies and the luxuries of the top of the ladder in the global society, the rich minority. These double mandates will be achieved by a new world order of global rules, regulations, and laws. This patron spirit of the age was and is the prince of the global economic imperialism. It was the principality who will inspire and lead the final and last global empire on the earth through commerce, trade, diplomacy, and the rule of law.
So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth, devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes, like the eyes of man, and a mouth, speaking great things.
The beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns is the picture and illustration of the last and final global empire on the earth. This empire will be subject to and be inspired and motivated by the patron spirit of the age, riding the black horse and holding a pair of balances in his hands. According to Revelation chapter 17 verse 11, and the beast that was and is not, even is the 8th and is of the 7 heads, and goeth into perdition. The last and the final global empire is the 8th kingdom or empire connected to the nation of Israel from our inception to the end of the church age. Not only is the beast the 8th kingdom, it is also the submission and embodiment of all the 7 kingdoms before this final 8th kingdom. Revelation chapter 13 verse 2 says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, Greece. Daniel chapter 7 verse 6. Also the rough goat, Daniel chapter 8 verses 21 to 22. And his feet were as the feet of a bear, Medo-Persia, Daniel chapter 7 verse 5. Also the ram with 2 horns, Daniel chapter 8 verses 3 to 4 verse 20. And his mouth as the mouth of a lion, Assyria and Babylon, Daniel chapter 7 verse 4. Jeremiah chapter 50, 17 to 20. Also, Daniel chapter 7 verse 19 says, then I will know the truth of the 4th beast, which was diverse from all the others, and exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, Rome, legs of iron, Daniel chapter 2 verse 33, and his nails of brass, Greece, belly and thighs of brass, Daniel chapter 2 verse 32. The chronology of the 7 heads upon the beast, which were the former empires or kingdoms which ruled over or oppressed the nation of Israel from our inception, were number 1, Egypt, about 1900 BC. Number 2, Assyria, 900 to 614 BC. Number 3, Babylon, 614 to 539 BC. Number 4, Medo-Persia, 539 to 331 BC. Number 5, Greece, 331 to 146 BC. Number 6, Rome, 146 BC to 476 AD. The 7th head was Nazi Germany, 1933 to 1945. For one reason or the other, the European and American theologians have underplayed or underwrote the emergence of Nazi Germany as an empire. Nazi Germany was the last power hegemony of the Germans over the whole of Europe. It started in 476 AD, when the German general Odoacer toppled the last of the Roman emperors, Romulus Augustulus. In 800 AD, Charles the Great, a German, was crowned the emperor of the Carolingian Empire, the basis of the modern Europe of today. In 962 AD, Otto I, a German, was crowned over the Holy Roman Empire, which became the first Reich of the German kingdom over Europe. King William I, a German, was crowned the German emperor in 1871. This was the second Reich of the German kingdom over Europe. The First World War of 1914 to 1918 witnessed the defeat of the German kingdom and allies by USA and allied forces. $30 million in gold were levied on Germany as part of the reparations for the cost of the First World War by the allied forces. All Germans' overseas colonies were impounded and shared among the conquering allied powers. Some of our national territories were shared to some of our neighbors. These harsh economic and political conditions by the Allied forces were the catalyst that brought Adolf Hitler into the mainstream and forefront of the German politics. In 1934, Adolf Hitler became the Reichsführer, the ultimate leader of the Third Reich of Germany, Europe's revived economic and military engine room. From 1939 to 1945, Adolf Hitler waged a return march against the Allied powers in what is now known as the Second World War. As was in the First World War, the USA and Allied forces roundly defeated Germany and Axis allies, but not until about 6 million European Jews have perished in the hands of Nazi Germany and her allies. So then, the seven heads are the seven mountains empires on which the woman, that is Israel or Jerusalem or Zion, seated. Revelation chapter 17 verse 9. And they were 1. Egypt, 2. Assyria, 3. Babylon, 4. Medo-Persia, 5. Greece, 6. Rome, and 7. Nazi Germany. The beast is the culmination and embodiment of the previous global empires on the earth, which was and is not. Even he is the eighth and of the seven, according to Revelation chapter 17, verse 11. And it will be the eighth and the last empire on the earth. This is the defining moment in world history. This eighth and last empire will evolve slowly, systematically, and dramatically through human history until the second coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. There is no other empire or kingdom expected on the earth apart from this eighth global empire. The conspiracy theory of the American evangelicals of a new world order is a fantasy bereft of contemporary history and record. The new world order began in 1945, and the world is experiencing its developments, dynamics, and evolution.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes, like the eyes of man, and a mouth, speaking great things. Thus he said, The fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings.
Apostle John saw 10 horns on the beast. Revelation chapter 13 verse 1, chapter 17 verse 12, which actually are the 10 toes in Daniel chapter 2 verses 40 to 44. Prophet Daniel also saw the 10 horns on the beast, but he saw a little 11th horn which came up among the 10 horns. He subdued 3 of the original 10 horns and grew to be the most prominent and preeminent horn among the 11 horns, according to Daniel chapter 7 verses 1 to 24. The little horn actually was a biological son to all the other 10 horns. All the other 10 horns gave birth to this little horn. At this point in human history, these 11 horns were regional great powers in their own rights, who have over the centuries and decades been at each other's throats in hegemonic supremacy wars. But in this dispensation, they will subsume their larger-than-size egos into an unprecedented, formidable, and dreadful worldwide alliance that will pitch the rich against the poor in a George Orwell's global village setting. This confluence of powers began with the world explorations by the Europeans in the 15th century. The global trade shifted from Europe to the rest of the world by the European Trade Charters Corporations. The European Trade Charters Corporation started the transatlantic slave trade, whereby African slaves were shipped from the West African coast as commodities to the European colonists of the New World of the North and South America. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Great Britain, soon spread to continental Europe and the rest of the world and served as impetus to the expansion of the global trade. These great powers soon carved out the entire inch of the world among themselves, either as colonies or protectorates, in order to exploit their natural resources, according to Daniel chapter 7, verse 23.
Britain cut the largest piece of African cake from Cairo to Cape Town, in addition to Nigeria and a few West African regions. It was also the British Empire that in 1894 imposed an arbitrary boundary around the many diverse ethnic groups and kingdoms that would make up Uganda. The southern Bantu-speaking people were given economic, political, and educational advantage. The northern ethnic groups, two in particular, the Acholi and the Langi, were the main recruits for military and police positions. By exploiting linguistic, ethnic, and cultural differences between the peoples of the North and South, Britain's divide and rule policies created a tension between them that helped maintain British rule. The French took an east-west slice of the continent as well as Madagascar. The Belgians took Rwanda, Burundi, and the Congo in what Joseph Conrad called the vilest scramble for loot that ever disfigured the history of human conscience. Slave labor took over 5 million lives. In Rwanda, Belgium entrenched the idea of the Hutu as a workforce and the Tutsi as extenders of Belgian rule. The politicization of these two cultures would profoundly contribute to the genocide of 1994. In Sudan, the British ruled the Arabs in the north and the blacks in the south as separate colonies, only to combine the areas before independence in 1956. The result has been relentless civil war, the Darfur massacres being the latest tragedy. The Portuguese decimated Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau well into the 1970s. The Italians took Libya, Eritrea, and Somalia. The Germans added Cameroon and Tanzania and committed the first genocide of the 20th century against the Herero people.
These colonies and protectorates soon evolved into nation-states, but these great powers were so careful not to create viable modern states. They created Noayo states. What is a Noayo? Nigerian professor Chiwensu said, a Noayo is a society of inward antagonisms, one held together by mutual internal antagonism, one which could not survive if its members has no fellow members to hate. A nation, on the other hand, is a society held together by antagonism towards external enemies and by their defense of a common territory. The colonial great powers deliberately and consciously created their colonies as Noyo states. Different races, tribes, religions, cultures were matched together indiscriminately to become nation states, to continue as trading posts and trading markets after independence from the colonial great powers. This is the greatest reason for the civil wars, international wars, civil insurrections, and terrorism in virtually all the independent developing nations of the world. The colonial great powers supplied the armaments and the ammunition to settle the scores among the opposing sides. The unbridled thirst for greater powers and territories among these great powers resulted in the First and Second World Wars. At the tail end of the Second World War in 1944, the United States of America, the little horn which came up among the 10 original horns, rose up to fulfill our destiny by establishing a new world order among the belligerent great powers.
My countrymen and my friends, my single duty is to speak to the whole of America. I had hoped against hope that some miracle would prevent a devastating war in Europe and bring to an end the invasion of Poland by Germany. For 4 long years, a succession of actual wars and constant crises have shaken the entire world and have threatened in each case to bring on the gigantic conflict which is today unhappily a fact. It is right to point out that the unfortunate events of these recent years have been based on the use of force or on the threat of force. And it seems to me clear, even at the outbreak of this great war, that the influence of America should be consistent in seeking for humanity a final peace which will eliminate, as far as it is possible to do so, the continued use of force between nations. I have said not once but many times that I have seen war and that I hate war. I say that again and again.
5 days after the Cairo conference, another conference was held at Tehran, capital of Allied Iran. Here, the chief executives of Britain and the United States met for the first time with Marshal Stalin. They reaffirmed their country's determination to work together in the war and in the peace to follow. In a joint statement, they declared, "We shall seek the cooperation and active participation of all nations, large and small, where peoples in heart and mind are dedicated, as are our own peoples, to the elimination of tyranny and slavery, oppression and intolerance. We will welcome them as they may choose to come into the world family of democratic nations."
From 1939 to 1945, Nazi Germany, one of the great powers, started the Second World War in conjunction with Italy and Japan, the Rome, Tokyo, Berlin Axis powers, against the rest of the world. The United States of America, the little horn, reluctantly entered the fray when Japan willfully bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The United States, with a military and economic power, then became the leader of the Allied forces against the Axis powers. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a great visionary and the originator of the New World Order, saw beyond the Second World War and the emergence of the global economic empire. He actively promoted the principles of this economic imperialism by co-opting Mr. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek of China, and Marshal Joseph Stalin of USSR. These allied powers formed the nucleus of the global economic empire beginning from 1944. At the defeat of Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan, the Axis powers in 1945, a new global power dynamics came into being, a delicate web of 11 military and economic powers, which consisted former antagonists, the defeated Axis powers, the victorious Allied powers, the former colonial powers, the great powers, the group of 7, later 8, industrialized nations, the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, formed the Global Economic Empire in 1945 with the headquarters in New York in the United States of America. The major members of the Global Economic Empire are as follows. Number 1, the United States of America, the little horn. Number 2, the USSR, later Russia. Number 3, Great Britain. Number 4, France. Number 5, China. Number 6, Germany. Number 7, Italy. Number 8, Japan. Number 9, Spain. Number 10, Poland. And number 11, Canada. The little horn, the United States of America, defeated 3 of the original older horns, namely Germany, Japan, and Italy, but rehabilitated them by integrating them into the global economic empire, according to Daniel chapter 7, verse 24. Despite the political, economic, and military discontent and rivalry between these 11 horns, there will be unity among them to subjugate the rest of the world to their common economic and political interests. Prophet Daniel prophesied of this global economic empire. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sweatest feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron. For as much as thou sweatest the iron mixed with the miry clay, and the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken, strong but not homogeneous. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay, according to Daniel chapter 10, verses 40 to 43. No one in the third world and Africa should be deceived by the often belligerence and infighting between these great powers. The nuclear Cold War between USA and USSR lasted more than 40 years without a shot being fired directly on each other's territories. The present economic war between USA and China may be as fierce and disconcerting, yet the USA will remain and lead the world as the sole superpower of the world, politically, economically, and militarily. It is therefore a great spiritual delusion for the American and European theologians to claim that the United States of America was not mentioned in the Bible. It is another delusion to claim that the United States of America is a declining empire. It is true that certain political forces have tried to diminish her from the inside over many years, yet the United States of America will fulfill her destiny as the sole superpower of the world, which started since 1944 until the second coming of Jesus Christ, the false Messiah, which is the Antichrist, the fierce eyes and the big mouth in the little horn, Daniel chapter 7, verses 8 and 20, shall certainly arise from the United States of America, not from Europe or anywhere else, in its due time to fulfill his destiny.